Welcome to When Theater Was Dangerous.
Thank you very much. But with that introduction, before I go into the particulars of who I am to introduce, I must say then they're the makers of water and the people who inspire our bodies to move and our spirits to manifest, which means that they bring and have brought for many years a great energy not only to this nation but from around the world. As has been said, welcome to Theater When Theater Was Dangerous, a conversation with John O'Neill to my left and Luis Valdez. I just want to read this opening paragraph that was prepared by the Roots Festival presenters to give them some framework to bring you this. From the cotton fields of the Mississippi Delta to the grapevines in California, community theater is rooted in the back-breaking labor of migrant farm workers and sharecroppers. John O'Neill in the South or Luis Valdez in the West. The struggles were different, but the similarity was about confronting abuses of power and greed, using culture and story as an organizing tool for people who often could not read or write, and I would add, but whose genius in their voice and their sense-making abilities passed on to the generation to generation gave us these two great individuals. What lessons from this history can inform where we are today and where we need to go? So I ask you to welcome them with a great round of applause, and I will say a little about each of them. But first, let's hear that. Both are pioneers. John O'Neill coming out of Southern Illinois University in 1962 already had the vision that there was no distinction to be made between politics and art, and immediately formed a workshop at Tougaloo College, which produced a lot of very important people. This small place that very few people know about has produced some really important activists, scholars, intellectuals. Went on then to form really and envision the cultural wing, if you will, the cultural complement of the modern day civil rights movement. John has received a number of honors, the Free Southern Theater in New Orleans. All of this you can go online. I don't want to go through a long list because I want them to start and for you to talk with them. But his movement, his vision inspired people through communities, not just to look at the big stages and to look at the imagination and creativity of others, but to see in themselves their own imaginations, their own ability to put into art form their life ways, and to confront the misery that they often face with transformative visions. Born in 1940 as Luis Valdez, who
1840? You've been holding up.
From Luis from Delano, California. Originally went off to college with a scholarship for math and physics, and found something right here on planet Earth called people and spirits rather than quarks and counterintuitive principles and the like. Also, going to the community, he says that Cesar Chavez. How many of you know the name of Cesar Chavez? Okay. Almost all hands are raised, but for those hands that are not raised, Google that name. Another very important democratic figure who made America what it is today. It was not just the black civil rights movement, Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King who did that, but it's people like Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez. So Cesar Chavez, this activist, was an inspiration. Many of you may know Luis by Teatro Campesino or by La Bamba film and other major films. And again, I'll ask you to go online and to look at the many credits, because we really want to enter into a conversation today coming from the place that they have always came, which was not through the optics of what other people would give to validate them, but what they would give back to the community that brought them to this place. and gave them their sense of an ability to speak their voice and to imagine new possibilities. So we want to open this conversation, and I want to ask them first, starting with John. Was theater dangerous? I know they were dangerous times, and I'd ask them to converse with one another, and at a certain point we will come to you. And also ask Louise to think about that construct. They were dangerous times, but how did you see theater at that time?
It was dangerous to be associated with the civil rights movement in 1963. But as far as it relates to theater, as far as it relates to theater, I felt frankly like we had a pass, we who worked in theater, because first of all, nobody knew that much about theater. And particularly the people who would have worked harm on people from the movement. They didn't know much about theater, and I gather didn't really care that much about it. And they found people who were holding demonstrations, doing sit-ins, doing voter registration work, voter education work, and things that were directly political in their intent and consequence. They found them to be much more dangerous. So we were kind of cute, kind of funny, and I remember one time we were doing In White America, and we were in Miss Hamer's home county, yeah, and we were performing at a freedom school, but the freedom school was a small building, and it turned out that once the students and their families and workers, civil rights volunteers from the area got in the building, it was pretty crowded. And just as we were about to start the show, there came this guy, a group of cars, about maybe 25 or 30 carfuls, led by the sheriff of that county, driving up, and they came into the theater. Many of them had to stand, but because the sheriff was an elected official, they picked a place on the front row for him to sit. And we started performing, and the vibe was pretty hostile, you know. At the end of the show, I bet you know Liz Sutherland. Yeah, she was a Bettina Martinez.
Yes.
Bettina Martinez.
Yes.
You know Liz? Bettina?
Yes.
Excuse me. Yeah, she lives out down on the coast. She happened to be in the house that night, and she she was writing for The Nation, and she wrote a really thoughtful essay about the experience of being in the theater that night when the sheriff and his deputies showed up. That's something you can Google too. So I think this gets to a question that I think is pretty important. That there is an important distinction, though a complement, between politics and art or aesthetics, in a co-equal relationship to those is economics, you know, and so where those three overlap, if the political circle is red And if the art circle is blue, and if the economic circle is yellow, there'll be a little triangle right in the middle where these things meet that will be brown. I call that the sweet brown spot, where, who was that laughing? And it seems important to me that we recognize the distinctions as well as the interdependence between these things.
Can you hold there, because I want to come back into art and ask a particular question of why art in connection with those two things.
But may I ask one question of Louise?
Please.
We met in 1965, as I recall, at a conference in Chicago. We knew of each other a lot before then, but that's where we met. And in one informal session over beer one night, you told a story that I have carried in my heart ever since then. The story of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And it seems so important. I hope before the day's over, you'll give me a refresher course in that story.
We knew that.
Please come to that story, but let me ask you the same thing. It was a dangerous time. In America, we had a black-white optic, despite the fact that Latinos, Spanish speakers, all of the cultural things that go along with that had been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. But our optic was, this was a black-white country. But there was something palpitating there that we are now very aware of in our neighborhoods, in our grocery stores, as in our school systems, as we see the changing cultural ways of our colleagues, and we see the mass democratic protests changing really the notion of what it is to be an American today and where we're going. Talk about those times in which you emerged as an artist. Were they dangerous times in your vantage point?
Well, in terms of the theater work, there were at least two occasions in which a loaded gun was put to my head for doing theater. And the first time was on the picket line during the grape strike. And a son of a grower pulled his gun, put it to my head, and says, "All right, act." And I almost shit, you know. But the thing is, almost. But the thing is that I did ask myself almost instantaneously a question that I thought about all these years, and the question was, is what I'm doing worth dying for? Is it worth dying for to do theater? Doing theater, is it worth dying for? And I concluded that it was. At that particular moment, in that particular place, it was absolutely what it was all about. And in order to explain that a little bit, I have to explain how I got into theater. I was born into a migrant labor camp in Delano, California in 1940, as you mentioned. And they have these all over the San Joaquin Valley, all over Texas, depends on where you are. Of course, you know, the part where I was born used to be Mexico. I mean, it's an uncomfortable fact, you know, that makes a lot of people nervous. But the fact is that half of the national territory of Mexico was usurped in the Mexican-American War in 1848. And so that's been a social and historical and cultural condition for Mexicans in the United States and Latinos in general ever since. And so it's been the challenge, really, of my art and my work to be able to respond to that condition. But I became very aware as a child that we were basically wage slaves. That we weren't exactly like black slaves, but we were wage slaves. That we were intended to be what we call mano de obra, you know, hands in the fields. And so in 1946, when I was 6 years old, I was actually on the road with my family before I could walk in my mother's arms. We were on the migrant path, so I grew up working in the fields. But the time that I knew more or less what was happening, 1946, it's time to go to school, we were still in the fields, and we came to a place called Corcoran, which was a big labor center at the time, a lot of cotton. It was the cotton country, King Cotton. And now there's a prison there. There's a state prison there where Charlie Manson resides. I don't know if you know his name. Juan Corona, Robert Downey Jr. was a guest there recently, you know. The fact is that a lot of the rural areas in California that have been mechanized have nonetheless become sites of huge federal and state prisons. And it's become really evident, obvious, that the incarceration of African American and Latino youth, particularly young men, is an industry. It's a cottage industry. And so the money it goes to the city to support itself. So that's a crime that needs to be addressed. But back in 1946, there was no prison. There was just a lot of cotton. And so we came to this big labor camp, and there must have been about 2,000 people there. There were all 100, you know, all kinds of tents, Army surplus tents from World War II. And everybody was out, the whole world. I mean, there were African Americans from the South and from California, and Filipinos, and white people, Okies. You know, we had the old Okies. They were out there cotton picking. And Sikhs from India, you know, with the turbans. And Mexicans, of course. I thought everybody was a cotton picker. You know, I said, we're all equal. You know, we're all out here. And color was not an issue then. And culture was not an issue. And farm workers, unlike other workers in America, had no protections. They'd never been unionized, and so we were at the mercy, really, of whatever they wanted to pay us. Piecework, mostly. So the cotton crop went like that year. I mean, it was, the workers were voracious. They just decimated it like locusts. So the cotton season was over, and the tents started to come down. People started to leave. We had to move on. It was starting to rain. We couldn't move on. My family couldn't move on because my dad's pickup truck had broken down. So he had up on blocks. He was trying to fix it. And after we moved out of one of the tents into one of the cabins that had been vacated, we kind of settled in there while my dad fixed the truck. Now, we were living from hand to mouth. This is the way farm workers live. You know, whatever we made that day would feed us in the evening. So with no work, we ran out of money, basically. And the way that we survived was going to fish. So we fished in the San Joaquin River. And my mom made tortillas, you know, and beans. Well, we were eating fish tacos before they were trendy. You know what I mean? We were barely surviving. Anyway, one morning, early in the morning, out there with my brother, and I almost drowned. I was 6 years old, and my mom got really worried. She said, maybe you and your brother better go to school. Now, we weren't going to be there for very long, but she said, just go to school. So we got on the bus, went to a nearby school called Stratford. Not Stratford on Avon, Stratford on the San Joaquin. Okay, and I had my little brown paper bag. It was at a premium. My mother had commandeered it from someplace. They still had paper shortages in 1946. And so I didn't want to take my lunch in a CNA sugar sack. I didn't want to, there was no plastic bag or anything. So my mom would make the tacos, you know, the flour tortilla tacos, and pack them up. And in the morning, I'd put them under my coat. And it felt great, you know, mama's tacos, you know, on the way to school. And so I used to put it in the closet, and at lunch, pull it out. There was no cafeteria in that school. And then eat, right? And at lunchtime, I discovered that the Anglo kids had lunch pails, you know? Yeah. And it was a big revelation to me, you know, with an apple and cupcakes and a thermos, you know, with milk. And I became ashamed of my tacos. I became ashamed of my mama's taco bag. It became like a symbol of shame for me. But then one day, but I still wanted it. I had folded it up very carefully and put it in the closet. One afternoon, the bus was leaving. I went to get my bag. It was gone. The teacher saw me running around. She asked me what I was looking for. I told her, oh, she's a little brown paper bag. And I said, yeah. She said, I took it. I said, well, give it back. She says, I can't. And she escorted me into a little office behind her desk. And there was my bag all ripped up, floating in a basin of water. I thought she'd gone berserk. I thought, se volvió loca la maestra. You know what I mean? And she said, no, look at this. And she reached in, grabbed a little piece of the brown paper bag, dipped it into some white paste, and put it on a mold. First time I noticed the mold. It was a face. It was an animal. It was a monkey. And then she put another little piece, smoothed it out, another little piece, smoothed it out. Said, you want to try it? I put it out, smoothed it out, smoothed it out. And at that moment, I discovered one of the secrets of the universe. It's called paper mache. And it was a mask. By the time it's November, I knew it was going to be for Halloween. So what's it for? It's for a play, she says. We're going to do a Christmas play. The whole school's involved. We need 2 first graders to do monkeys. Christmas in the jungle. The whole school's involved, even the school band. We're having auditions next Monday. So I forgave her about the bag, you know what I mean? And I auditioned, and I got my first role in the play. And she made a beautiful mask out of my mama's taco bag. I got a costume that was better than my own clothes, you know, little red vest, little green pants, red shoes, little tail, little hat. I mean, I was in heaven. And then I saw the old school, the beat up old school auditorium being transformed. The band is playing. I mean, I'm thinking, this is it. This is my debut before the world. You know, here I am, being a monkey, you know. And what happened, that was on a Friday. We're going to do the play on a Friday. On a Monday or Tuesday, I came home from school. My mom says, we're leaving tomorrow. And I said, Mom, wait a minute. The play is on Friday. And she says, I know, but we're being evicted. I'm sorry, there's no place for us to live. And so I cried, you know, and she cried with me. But the next morning, my dad stoically got the truck going, and we climbed into the back. And I'll never forget pulling away from little town, went through Stratford, seeing it receded to the fog, and this big hole opened up in my chest. Now, it would have destroyed me. But I've always believed that you can turn any negative into a positive. And so what happened is that that hole became the hungry mouth of my creativity. And for the last 65 years, I've been pouring stories and plays and movie scripts. The hole is still there. It's a lot smaller, but it's the source of everything that I do. After that, I wanted to play. Every time I played with my cousins. I do theater. You know, I would make my own masks. I had the secret of paper mache. And I'd pull together any house, any barn, any outside under the trees. We would play. My cousins would get bored, say, we don't want to do it anymore. You know, oh, come on, man. You know, we don't know what to say. Ah, wait a minute. Here, say this. I'm at 7 or 8, and I'm writing lines for them. I didn't know that I was a playwright, but I really zeroed in on it. Now, that went with me. The other thing that went with me was the residual anger at the injustice of having been kicked out of the labor camp at 6 years old. So 19 years later, I went to Cesar Chavez, and I said, I want to do a theater out by and for farm workers. And he said, that's fine. He said, but you know, there's no money to do theater in Delano. There's no actors in Delano. There's no stage in Delano. There's no time to rehearse. We're on the picket line night and day. Do you still want to do it? I said, absolutely, Cesar. What an opportunity. So the Teatro Campesino began on the picket line of the labor struggle, the biggest labor struggle that California had in 35 years, in order to right the wrongs that I experienced as a child.
Wow.
Mary, the Mother of Christ, appeared to anyone in the world. Now they have apparitions all over the place. But she appeared supposedly to an Indian called Juan Diego, or Paulatoxi, eagle that speaks, a messenger, out in the outskirts of Mexico City in 1531. And what she requested from the Indian was that he go to the Bishop of Mexico, who was the highest authority, and says, tell him that I want a temple built on this spot. Now, at that time, that was heresy, because she was requesting that an Indian be built, a temple be built on a hill that belonged to the Indians, and that was where they worshipped Tonantzin, which means our mother in Aztec. But he went, and she says, I'll protect you. If they didn't believe him, but they didn't burn him either, you know, so he went back. He ended up going 4 times. And finally, the last time, the bishop wanted proof. And he said, we want some roses. You bring some red Castilian roses as proof. And so the Virgin says, don't worry about the roses, I'll get them for you. And so she made them appear on a hill. Juan Diego collected them in his tilma, his mantle made of vegetable fiber, and he carried it back to the bishop, and he opened it up and dropped, and there's the roses. But on the tilma, on the mantle, there was an emblazoned image of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And that image still resides in the Basilica in Mexico City. It is the image that farm workers carried all the way to Sacramento, 360 miles on our march in 1966. It is the image that Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa used in their struggles. She's a representative not of the church, but of the Indian peoples and of the survival of the conquest. And so we celebrate her spirit because she's the Earth Mother, because she is our mother. She is the most divine image of God that there is on planet Earth, besides Isis and besides some of the other images we get from other cultures. But the fact is that in Christianity, there's no respect for Mary. We, you know, we have turned her into the Virgen de Guadalupe in the culture. She turned herself. We believe in it more than we believe in the church. And so we do this image in our play. We've been doing it for 40 years. And she's our biggest draw. She draws about 10,000 people when we present in Christmas at the Mission. And she remains a living, breathing symbol of our hope and our root in America.
John, so Luis finds his muse through papier-mâché. He discovers his imagination, his creativity, his voice, his production skills, but doesn't lose the opposition to the terror and the marginalization of the time. How did you find your muse in the arts?
That's a good question. My parents were school teachers in a small town, 2,000 people, half of whom were white, and we didn't know any of them. We knew who they were. If there was a reason to, like the mayor, we knew who he was and so forth and so on, but we had no meaningful, viable relationship with these people. And but my parents had the good judgment to hey, it's my sister, and my brother-in-law. They had the good sense to say to us kids that it really doesn't matter what you do as long as you work as hard as you can to do the best you can. So I got out of high school and into college and was out of college pretty much before I'd come up with an idea about what I would do. The first or second year of college, I don't remember when it was, unlike Luis, I had a little challenge when it came to chemistry and math. I tried those courses in those first early years, and I decided, well, I'm not going to be a scientist. Then, shortly after that, I sort of eliminated, well, my grandfather was a preacher, and there was a lot of gentle nudging that maybe you can be one of those, you know, but they never. When I realized that in order to be a preacher, you sort of had, it was sort of a given that you should believe in God, you know, and I couldn't find a way to justify belief in God in my own heart. And so I said it'd probably be pretty hard to be a preacher. I thought I would be an artist then, you know, of some sort. And gradually, the kind of art that I was going to do turned out to be theater. It was a process of elimination, you know, eliminated lots of other options. When I finally settled on theater, I had a penchant for philosophy as well. That's what I studied in college more than anything else. When I got to, one of my favorite professors was a neo-Hegelian. He had taken up Hegel as his center of his study. And it's where I began to become aware of what it means, dialectics. And he also taught the history of philosophy, and so it was a wonderful experience, college for me. And I discovered, when we got to the dialectics, that conflict is the essence of development. You know, when you need the right hand, I mean, you need to lift something up. The opposition between this muscle and these along here give you the capacity to raise things up. The opposition between the front and the back muscles in your leg lets you walk, and so forth and so on. And I said, this is, and then when I got to my first playwriting class, come to find out that they thought that conflict was the essence of drama. And I said, well, if conflict is the essence of drama, and opposition or conflict is the essence of the philosophical system that is that explains more and more the world than any other notion. I said, it makes sense if I'm going to be an artist then to be a dramatist because that's what conflict is about. And so it just made sense. I mean, I wish I had a story more more dramatic.
That's quite a story. I want to get out of the role as a sort of moderator questioner. Really have you guys to flow a little before we go to the audience. And but let me prime that by asking this, or noting this. With the emergence of both of your voices, inspired by the civil rights movement, inspired by the labor movement, inspired by the terror of human conflict, the way that black and brown people were treated in this country, inspired by the lack of sometimes food, and certainly any big social mirror to give validation outside of the small spaces in which you live. But once you started your individual work, something happened across this country. Community theater, you're referred to as the father of modern Chicano theater. Community theater in the black community. Not artists coming from Hollywood. Of course, we didn't have all the big shows now and the awards that big-time artists get. But voices of community started to emerge. Talk a little among yourselves about, one, whether you had any consciousness of what you were beginning to be linked to, this uproar from the bottom, and any sense of where that might go, or why it was starting.
I started going to San Jose State College in 1958. So one of the first things that I did in that first year is become very aware of the civil rights movement. And so I joined the civil rights movement. I participated in demonstrations in California. But we had reason to picket, and I never really picketed before in that form. But I felt that the civil rights movement was my movement. I felt that there was basically, I was a black man. There was no distinction between what I was in my life and what was happening, in this movement. This is my movement. And I guess those memories also go way back to a childhood, because outside of the town where I lived in the San Joaquin Valley, there was another little town that really wasn't a town. It wasn't an incorporated community, but it was an African-American community in the southern San Joaquin Valley, and it was called Freemanville. And these were people, I think, from the south. But I had friends there. I had a friend that Willie, who lived there. So I became very aware that we were sharing a similar reality, even though the whole valley was segregated in its own way. And so my dedication then to the civil rights movement was not inconsistent with everything that I had known in my life. I had to participate in this movement because it was me. And I had to find a way then to make it work for me. One of the things that I became aware of, I think about either 64 or early 65, was the Free Southern Theater. I was in San Francisco, working with the San Francisco Mime Troupe by then, working in the parks, doing commedia, and learning these techniques because I absorbed them. But I became aware that there was this group that was touring in the South, doing in White America and waiting for Godot. And I said, that's what I want to do. They're doing what I'm going to do. And as a matter of fact, the night that I left San Francisco for Delano to join Cesar Chavez, I had a long conversation out in a car in San Francisco with a guy named Murray Levy, who was part of the FST. And so he's asking me, how are you going to do what you're going to do? He said, do you have grants? Do you have any support? And I said, no. He says, do you have any plays that you're going to do? And I said, no. Do you have any actors with you? And I said, no. He said, how are you going to do it? And I said, I'm going to do it with my people. That's all I know, you know. And he says, well, good luck, you know. And but the fact is that I was very happy that he was from the Free Southern Theater and that I made that contact the night before I left for Delano. I didn't meet John until after that. But the thing is that I just want to acknowledge that the Civil Rights Movement was a tremendous inspiration for me. And I consider the African community, the African American community, to be leaders in America. I accepted that immediately. Martin Luther King was my leader as much as anybody else's. Fannie Lou Hamer, you know. I mean, all of these leaders, Stokely Carmichael showed up in Delano. And I showed him around, you know, the Great Strike. I knew Eldridge Cleaver. I mean, in other words, I intersected with people in the African American movement because we were part of the same movement. Now, somewhere along the line, we became the Chicano movement. But it's really an outgrowth out of another branch of the same movement, as far as I'm concerned. It is no different. Also, I think that I'm part of the labor movement. You know what I'm saying? White radical organizers. I'm part of that. I'm an extension of that. One of the things that inspired me early on was all that happened in the 30s. I wasn't born yet. I was born in 40, but the thing is that what happened in the 30s in terms of the theater in this country inspired my theater as well. I absorbed that. And I had to go to college to learn about that. But in fact, it was my privilege to meet William Saroyan, John Howard Lawson, Harold Klurman, and have them see my work eventually and say, all right, you're on the right track. You see what I'm saying? We feed each other. What we do is we are one continuum. And there are a lot of people in the United States that are on the right side of America, that we represent the best of America. We represent the working people of America. We're the anti-racists. We're the anti-racists, and that has to be defended at all fronts. And even within our own separate movement, sometimes we hear we hear voices that are not right. You know, there was a certain kind of counter-racism that developed within the Chicano community that I opposed. Eventually, I said, you know, to be Chicano does not mean to go around hating gabachos. You know, that doesn't do it. To be Chicano is to love yourself. Start there. You know, and you love yourself, you love everybody. And so, and God bless my mother too, because she was my spiritual counselor. She had me believe in the separate, listen, I believe in the 7 African powers, las 7 potencias africanas. That's part of my spiritual inspiration. So there you are. I mean,
John, and then I'm going to come to you.
Wow. Yeah. We had, when I got into the Civil Rights Movement in 1962, I was on my way to New York because that's where the theater was, you know. And I was going to go, well, I'd been to New York a couple of times and to student conferences and things like that. And when I got there, I was greatly disappointed in the work that I saw in the New York theater. It didn't seem to be about anything very important in the main. There were exceptions, of course. But I couldn't, and I had come through this to the conclusion while studying philosophy in college that content is the central part of the art-making process. It's what you are making art about. What is it that we're trying to do? Whose interest are we trying to serve? What and how do you do that? I also learned that by reading plays that most good ideas, most ideas that were pushing human society forward, came not from the top down, but came from the bottom up. And so I saw evidence of how that was working in the movement, because the people who were challenging the social system, the political and economic system of the nation, were poor people, rural people, grassroots people. And they're the ones who made the movement and made the movement move. There were a number of people who sort of sat on top of the movement and claimed. I remember in Greenwood, Mississippi, we were working there, and there was one of the greatest obstacles to organizing Greenwood, Mississippi, which turned out to be the headquarters of the Mississippi Project, was a guy named Cleveland. I can't remember what his last name was right now. Just can't remember. But he wore big fancy suits. he wore those long Stacey Adams shoes. He had gold teeth in his mouth, and he stood in the way. He went and carried a report to the sheriff, who was the main law enforcement figure. He carried a report to the sheriff and saying, well, those Negroes from out of town are doing this, that, and the other. They were talking about Sam Block. I don't know if you remember Sam. But Sam and Willie Peacock, they were the first ones that went to Greenwood working for the movement. And they were from rural counties right around, but somehow they got to be Negroes from out of town. Mr. What's his name? After the movement got to be a force with which to be reckoned, who got to be chairman of the Greenwood movement? But Mr. So-and-so. I said, well, I'll be doggone. Is that how this thing works? And so we in SNCC always admired and celebrated the notion that that power, legitimate power, should come from the ground up, and that our job was to help to support and create leadership from that ground. And when we started the theater, we said we want our theater to be useful to people, and ultimately we wish to tell their stories. I didn't have the benefit of having grown up in that cult. Well, I didn't know I had that benefit. Let me put it that way. Then I started paying attention to my grandfather and so forth. But those elements started to come together, and the idea was to make a theater that took on the purposes and goals and aims and techniques of the movement as the leading element in what we try to make a theater do. And when we heard that you guys had started a theater out on the coast, we didn't know anything. We had heard about and read about the Great Pickers movement, and it sounded like what we were trying to do, but we didn't know what was going on, and so we just admired it from a distance. And a couple of years later, when we had a chance to meet, I thought, yeah, they're doing the right thing, and we're flattered by the fact that we see ourselves as one.
Well, my mind floats to Brazil around the 1930s, o Teatro Negro, the Black Theater, Dias de Nascimento, just died in 90. This was the Black Theater in Brazil, the largest African-descended population outside of Nigeria, somewhere between 80 and 100 million people today. But in that theater, a lone white man entered, Boao, theater of the oppressed. For those of you who are in theater, you have not heard these names, check them out. But it shows you something about the human circumstance around the world, of how we can feed off of one another's humanity and become one another without giving up who our parents and grandparents were. It actually is transforming. I want to come to you now. I'm really impressed. I see some people out here with notebooks, and our format is you get no more than 1 minute, and I'd like to take about 4 of you, and then just ask John and Luis to either interact with all of what you raise or say, or select those elements that they want to respond to. Tell us quickly who you are and what your question, your observation, or your criticism might be.
Hello, my name is Olisa Enrico, and I represent the Conciliation Project. On behalf of the Conciliation Project, we are a social justice theater company that dialogues about racism and uses pieces. I personally have studied both of you, and thank you for the broad character choices you have given me and the information. I stand on your shoulders, we stand on your shoulders, and on behalf of the Conciliation Project and other social justice theaters, I thank you for being brave enough so that I and we could be brave enough to do what we need to do now today. And with that, I ask to all, how might the different branches of movements be reminded and remembered that we truly are in one struggle and come together once again?
Thank you very much.
My name is Will McAdams, and I'm humbled to be with you. I wanted to ask you about the use of humor, because both of your work is so funny, and I wanted to know if that was just coming out of your personalities, or whether that was an intentional, subversive technique, or both.
Both for me.
Should we start? I said I take two more. No, well, okay. What,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead and respond to those two, and then I'll
saw
say
Blue
after you
grab
respond.
this microphone
Okay,
and
go
said,
ahead.
I don't get in first.
Speaking of humor, go ahead.
One of the things that humor is a direct response to fear. It's one of the ways to diffuse fear. Where you're facing somebody who's armed, somebody who's dangerous, who's there deliberately to intimidate you. One of the responses that you can give immediately is to ridicule them. Now, and sometimes at a danger, under the consequences of being quite a dangerous thing to do, under the risk of being knocked down, jailed. All that happened to me. I was beaten, and jailed. As I told people in Japan once, a bunch of group in directors in Japan, I said, I've been jailed for doing theater. And I hope it wasn't for the quality of my work, but it's for the politics. And the thing is that humor, to get up and satirize, ridicule somebody to their face, to clown in the face of your enemies, is to overcome them. The other people take courage from that. And also it takes power from them, it drains them. So, I mean, it's a courageous act, it's a dangerous act, but it's one of the ways that that human beings can deal with a condition. And so, humor became real important. Humor is also very uplifting. I believe in that theater must uplift, not put down. Not put down. And the theater of the oppressed does not need to oppress anybody, It needs to uplift, it needs to liberate. And so, we use all of the devices that we can. Get people to believe in themselves, and to laugh at the enemy and or the oppressors, and then you've got something really meaningful and useful. Okay, all right.
I would add to that and to your point that it seems to me that the more important, the heavier the problem is that you're trying to confront, if you make your treatment of that problem as heavy as the problem is, people will seek to escape from the theater just like they try to escape from those problems in life. So you gotta find a way to make it light, to put helium in the issue so that it floats up and you can think about how to handle it, you know. So I think that lightness of touch is a terribly important thing for the reasons that Louise just mentioned.
And to our young activists, acting social justice person here, to her question about how
I can respond to her. Yeah, how to unify. I think it all zeroes in. I've said this before in the little meeting that we have, but I'll repeat it. It's what motivates me is I'm still working on the concept of the human being. When I was thinking of going into physics, I wanted to go into theoretical physics. I wanted to do research. The arts allowed me the possibility of doing that directly. The research that all art groups do is research on the nature of the human being. Okay? Now, for instance, our concept of education. I think it's really fallacious. It's inside out because we go to school and they view us as empty vessels that need to be filled, when it's quite the reverse. We are full vessels that need to be emptied, okay? And education means to draw out, to lead out of yourself. You already know everything that you need to know. You just don't know it, okay? And so your educational experience should draw this knowledge out of you. It's in your genes. Each one of us is the end product of over 1 million years of evolution. You carry within you the glory of the past. You carry within you the wisdom of your ancestors. This needs to be drawn out in a kind and stimulating way in an educational system that respects you for what you are. Now here, I'm motivated by a Mayan myth that you're not completely human until you travel the 4 roads. And the 4 roads are the white road, the black road, the red road, and the yellow road. Now I translate that into the 4 corners of humanity. Unless you know the African in yourself, you don't know the black road. Unless you understand the white road, which is Europe or the Middle East, you don't know yourself. Unless you understand the yellow road, which is all of Asia, you don't understand. And if you don't understand the red road, which is Native America, you don't know who you are. You need to travel the 4 roads in order to be complete, in order to be holistic. And so that is my advice to the young groups, is to identify with your humanity and understand the fullness of it and try to find expression of that, and you'll eventually come together with everybody else.
Ditto.
Can I see, are there other hands before I pass the mic?
My name is Tony Sanchez, and I also work with the Conciliation Project. I've also had the honor to read both of your works and enjoy much of the art you brought to the world. And I want to thank you, Luis, for helping me identify within theater my own Latino view of it. And my question for you is, we talk a lot in TCP about our technique protecting us and being clear in our choices and really having tough training and holding to our theatrical techniques to protect ourselves from hecklers or people who would seek to destroy us. And I was curious, how can we gain from your experience, what other techniques are there besides comedy and being strong in your own theatrical work that we can use to protect ourselves from people who would seek to tear our movement down?
It helps if you're spiritually balanced, to begin with. A lot of people don't understand the need for spiritual balance in a political struggle. They think you're becoming Jesus freaks or, you know, or whatever, but it doesn't matter what the congregation is. But the important thing is the human spirit. You know, it's universal. In a sense, you're connected to the universe. You're connected to the cosmos. And if it weren't for the sun, we wouldn't be here. If it weren't for the moon, you know, we'd have the same problem. But the thing is that spirit lives within you, and you have to be able to find that balance within yourself. Some of it is physical. Some of it is physical. And we started working with the body. We call what we do the theater of the sphere. This is our aesthetic. What does that mean, the theater of the sphere? It means that you work the sphere of yourself. We all live within a sphere. You understand? And that sphere, the way that we operate within that sphere is through our spine. Our spine is a feathered serpent. It's not just a pretty symbol on the walls. The feathered serpent is actually your spinal column. It connects to the medulla oblongata and it goes all the way down to the nerve endings of your body. And so when you're vibrating on stage, you're activating your whole being. You know what I mean? But you can't be afraid to use your body. In African culture, the one things that I identify with completely in the African culture is the genius and the wisdom, the ancient wisdom of knowing that we are all in our bodies. But you know, you come to white America and you do this, and that's obscene. You know what I'm saying? Suddenly you say, what are you doing a bump and grind for? Well, this isn't a bump and grind, this is my U-joint. You know what I'm saying? This is, you gotta do this in order to be able to move, right? And if you don't do this, you'll die young. You know what I mean? And if you don't do this, you won't reproduce. But the fact is that it goes out into the limbs, so we believe in a very physicalized theater, right? It's not just a matter of standing up and talking, you know? You gotta move, you gotta move. And so that is, what that does is that creates a vibration. The Mayans used to call our human being, used to call it winikli, which means vibrant being. That you're a vibrating root of the universe. That's why every human being is a vibrant being. That's why it's such a tragedy when there are drive-bys and you see these young people shooting themselves on the streets. They're wasting a miracle, the miracle of themselves right on the street. That's the tragedy of it, because we're all vibrant beings. But this vibration, if you got the vibration going, you don't know it, but when you drive down the freeway, you're vibrating at a high rate of speed. This is why you sometimes don't crash into the car that's next to you, because that vibration, in a sense, protects you. Going through the Holland Tunnel, you ever done that? Shoo, you know what I mean? Within inches, of another car, but your vibration keeps you safe. So when you're politically out there, I see these movies of Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy, some of these early leaders facing dangers to the life and limb out in the marches. And I've been there, when people are throwing bricks at us. The one thing that protects you is your vibration. Keep your vibration high and it won't penetrate. You know what I mean? It's again, you gotta believe in the spirit though, you gotta believe in the vibration, or you won't get there. If you believe you're a piece of meat, somebody's gonna eat you.
Well, I'd start with an endorsement. The question of building unity is what a piece of what I heard in your comment, and I think that's crucial. I think this is not a good time. I remember when my kids were small over there. I used to tell them as it became clear that that the movement was not going to reach the end that we dreamed of, that we were not going to find what we used to call the new community in a few years. And as I get older, I come to realize that we're perhaps worse off now than we were in 1963 by common measure. I mean, if you look at the quality of education that's available to us, if we look at employment, if we look at housing, if we look at, you name the life expectancy, you name the index for the quality of life, and we're in a state of decline right now. And we tend all too often to want to pass the job of arresting the decline to our, quotes, leaders. Let the president take care of that. Let the mayor take care of that. Let the Congress do this. Let and on down the list. Well, those who have good spirits are doing the best they can already. Those who have bad spirits seem to be in prevalence right now. And they are happy with the way things are rolling. So if things are going to change, it's got to be the people. I think change tends to come, as I suggested earlier, from the bottom up, not from the top down. And so I think that means that we have to find people who share our condition, share our situation in life, and work as hard as we can to build common cause with those people. And that's about building coalitions and making partnerships. That's what I think we have to do.
Well, the time has come for us to make this change. I really want to thank these two voices who gave and continue to give a whole generation in particular communities a real understanding that where we live, where we move, we can put forth our voice, we can express our image, we can put our dreams in the public space and say that we are going to make a contribution to change. They did that not only for their two racial and ethnic communities, but they did it for an entire nation. And their works, inspired by people in ordinary communities like we all live in, emerged to be at the highest stages. We haven't talked about all of the Hollywood fame, because that's really the least of it, it seems to me, that they're telling us. It came from ordinary people.
Well,
And I think
one little point about that, in case there are any conflicted artists out there. I mean, I've been to Hollywood, I've been to Broadway and stuff, but one of the things you need to understand about the economic system in relation to art is that every business, corporate business especially, deals in commodities. And one of the things that happens to you as an artist, as a filmmaker, as a writer, in the industrial movie business, for instance, you become a commodity. So the choice becomes, it's yours. You know, are you going to exist, try to exist with some people do? I'm not saying that everybody there has failed. No, some people succeed in their own way. But you need to understand there's a very careful distinction between that as opposed to working at the grassroots and working with your community and building from the ground up. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, this is as legitimate as that. You understand? That this is not community theater, as somebody said. This is not community art. This is the most essential thing why we do what we do, which is to build from the ground up with our art form. The other is just business. You can make money at it, but money is sometimes the worst thing that you need. What you need is spirit. Anything that kills spirit, anything that kills hope. Remember that the legacy that we leave is to pass the torch, a living torch. It has to be a vibrant, burning torch that we pass, not an object. And so if you can do that in a film, fine. If you can do that in music, fine. But not at the expense of the heart of the issue, which is the vibration inside the work itself.
And we can turn back time. So we actually now, I'm told, have more time. So before I ask John to speak on that question, then tell us a little about what you went through in producing Zoot Suit and the Rudy Valance story, the kind of sociology and brokering with other elements in the creative community that you had to deal with, not just producing it all yourself.
A real important distinction between the theater and film, okay, is if you're a playwright, you own your work. It's like you're a novelist, you own your novel, and if you're a playwright, you own your play. If you're a screenwriter in Hollywood, you don't own your screenplay. You sell your screenplay, and it becomes the property of whoever buys it. A studio buys it, it's their screenplay. If you become a director, it's your movie in a sense, but you're also there for hire. And it's really not your movie, it belongs to the studio. It belongs to the corporation that's going to distribute it. So in a way, I mean, you trade, it's a trade-off. You trade off tremendous exposure, worldwide exposure, for control, ultimately. And if you're a playwright, if you're a poet, that work is always your own. I figure that the most important thing that I do as an artist is tell stories. My job is to capture the stories that have not been told. Now, if I can get those down on paper or into the computer in some form so that they get preserved, they can always become movies, they can always become something else, but they'll always be mine. You understand what it is? It'll always belong to the people that I intended it for. It become part of the popular culture. I think that the best things that I have done as an artist have been things that have been not done for credit. They've just moved on. They become part of the general patrimony. Everybody does it. El Teatro Campesino does actos. Those actos belong to everybody. They're not anybody particular, property. It's the property of all. It'd be wonderful if we all had that freedom to be able to do that. So that's just an important little distinction in terms of writing that I need to make. But again, your life is your own. You have to make your own decisions. It's a spiral. And as far as Zootsuit was concerned, it began as a response to the challenge to write a play about the history of Los Angeles. And that happened to me 10 years after I received the pamphlet. I was performing with a teatro in LA, and somebody came and gave me a pamphlet of this case back in 1942-43. It was called the Sleepy Lagoon Murder Mystery. And I looked at it in 1968, and I said, this is hot stuff. I could write a play about this. But between the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, I could not afford to take the time to write a play. I'm going to put it away, I told myself, and bring it out at the proper time. 9 years later, when I was invited by the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles to write a play about Los Angeles history, I pulled out the pamphlet, and it became the basis of my play, Zootsuit. It happened to be an explosion within that community. It ran for almost a year. We closed at 90-some% capacity. We didn't close because we lost an audience, but to be able to focus on the film. But the thing is that it became a phenomenon in that community because it changed minds and hearts. And that was more important to me than the artistic achievement. But they went hand in hand. Now with La Bamba, I had another thing. Let me say, Zootsuit was the first, I don't like the terms Hispanic or Latino. I'll be frank. So it's first Chicano play on Broadway. I don't like the term Latino because it's too limited. If I'm a Latino, you're a Latino, and I'll tell you why. It's because the original Latinos were the Romans. It was the Roman Empire. They conquered all of the known world. They went all the way to England, and you know something? Those suckers were great lovers, man. Yeah. So if I'm a Latino, half the people in England are Latinos, you know what I'm saying? They left the Latino seed there. Okay. Hispanic is an adjective. The term is Hispanic American. That I'll accept. But it limits the Indian thing. I don't get to talk about my indigenous ancestry. You talk Hispanic, which means Spanish flavored. It means they took me by the ankles and dipped me in Spanish sauce, and said, okay, now he's an Hispanic. But what they really mean, what they really don't want to say, is that the person is Afro-Cubano. They don't want to say that this guy is a Yaqui Indian mestizo. You know what I'm saying? So they call Hispanic. Hispanic is an adjective that it tends to clean up this variegated melting pot of human beings in the Americas. So it's not a good term. Even in Spain, they don't like it, Even in Spain, they don't like it. So we need to find better terminology. I like the word human being, the term human being. I think that's nice. But I'll tell you, I'm an American. I like that one. American is something we can all share. And so, I forgot the point. Anyway, the thing is,
Good.
it does happen. All right.
So John, first of all, how many of you know or heard of Junebug Jabbo Jones? Talk about Junebug and who she was as well as he was and who they might be today.
I see 4 or 5 of them now. Junebug is a mythic figure that is like that guy one of those guys who figured out that people get more out of laughter than they do out of tears sometimes. In the late 50s, early 60s, let me say first that a lot of people who came to the civil rights movement came through and came into SNCC, came from Howard University in DC. Howard had a bit of campus folklore about this character named Dr. Junebug Jabbo. He picked up that name as it went along. Junebug was that fellow who spent more time in learning how to get over than how to do things, and how to identify and analyze things and so forth. You learn how to get over. And if the students didn't like him getting over on them, he could just take his grade book out and whoop them with it. Howard is a pretty expensive school, and so people had sacrificed a lot to get there. They didn't want to waste that education, that opportunity to learn, so they often had to swallow their pride. But they would, in order to get back at Dr. Junebug, they started telling each other stories about Junebug. Did you hear what Dr. Junebug said today? He did this, he did that, and so forth. Well, in time, Dr. Junebug got a jabbo because of the Junebug jabbo, it repeats the sound. And jabbo sounds like you talk too much anyway. And then the students brought this phenomenon with them to SNCC when they got involved in SNCC. Oh, yeah. That's my daughter. Between her and my wife, they don't let me get away with nothing. SNCC is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, for people who don't know. That
just celebrated its
50th anniversary, yeah. And so, at any rate, the SNCC students from Howard who came down with this Dr. Junebug Jabbo, and as they start telling stories about Dr. Junebug in bull sessions, it turned into he picked up his Jones. Y'all know about Jones. That's another generation, doesn't it? They don't know what a Jones is, but y'all look that up on the web. Because since most people who go to college tend to be urban, they carry with them those urban biases, which lead to the conclusion, false conclusion, invalid conclusion, I guess I should say, that rural people are dumb. And so, because Dr. Junebug hadn't had enough English and math and this and that and the other, he was thought to be dumb. But gradually, as the SNCC people started working, it turned out that that the people we ended up working with were mostly rural people, rural and small town people. And they sounded like Dr. Junebug, but they didn't feel like Dr. Junebug. So Junebug Jabbo Jones became the symbol of the wisdom of ordinary people. James asked me to talk about him because Junebug has become an iconic figure for me. Because I started collecting Junebug stories from other SNCCs, and I gradually began to realize that there are oppressed and exploited people all over the world who have similar stories and similar characters. And I've been to the middle of Kansas, Oklahoma, out into Idaho, and and people white as snow come up to me and say things like, you know, you remind me of my grandfather or my uncle, you know, and I take that as flattering, you know, when they do that, because that means they got the point that this is a celebration of the struggles of people the world over. And so that's Junebug in a quick course. He's available on the web too. He still tours a little bit, by the way. And if you want him to come to your town,
well, time has caught up. There's just so much more we could talk about, and I just want to close by one, asking you to give these two citizen artists applause, and I put that term citizen there. Go out and support these young adults that you've heard from today in their theater. They're in this community. They're in communities like this across the country. There's just no reason that we should not go out and hear their voices and let them take us forward and support the Roots Festival and stay close to this community. Thank you.